Hey everyone, I'm Colin Pugh with the Undetermined States of America, and I am here with my very first podcast guest, Phil
Lindsay, yeah.
Lindsay from the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard, where he runs the Democracy Innovation Lab or Hub, the Democracy Innovation Hub. I had the pleasure of meeting Phil at a board game cafe. It was planned to meet there. It wasn't random. Playing Monopoly and seeing how frustrated he was at a board game cafe in Brooklyn where we both reside, and got to know him and learned about his work at the Democracy Innovation Hub on citizens' assemblies. And it is really inspiring to me and very related to the hopes and dreams of the Undetermined States of America vision and movement. So I wanted to welcome Phil to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
Why don't we start off by you just telling us a little bit about yourself, like where you're from and how you got into this work?
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, lived there until I was 23, then lived out actually moved to Mexico for a year, my final year of college at Temple, where I studied Latin American studies and economics. And I spent almost a year in Mexico City, which was probably the most important year of my life. And then because it really formed me in a lot of ways. And then I lived in New Mexico, where my grandma was living, and my dad's side of the family's from, for a couple years. And then got the chance to live in Germany for a year, and then came back to the U.S. and have been in New York for the past 7 years, and have been working at the Hannah Arendt Center for the past 3 years. And throughout that time, since graduating from school, I have tended to focus on public outreach and translation because I speak Spanish, and grew up in a family where, being involved in the community in the very dense neighborhood I grew up in, the Italian market. Now it's really the 9th Street market, the Mexican market today more than anything. And in that neighborhood, seeing my parents involved, and the way that community was formed around the community garden behind my parents' house, that and my experience in high school with a group called the Philly Student Union, both my parents as role models and the other adults in that community that were working together to establish the community garden, hold political meetings about what was happening in the neighborhood, plus an experience organizing as a student around educational funding reform in Philly, were the two most, I think, politicizing kind of background events in my life growing up in Philly. And let's say I've worked on different political campaigns. I've worked in communications. I've worked kind of as the person at the front desk at a community health center, and then got the chance to join the Hannah Arendt Center 3 years ago. Was very lucky. Went to a conference that they had on sortition and citizens' assemblies, which we're going to talk about today. That kind of brought me back to that initial experience in Philly, where it was very focused on what is the common good, how to bridge across divides, that I experienced, especially in high school, and that's where I
So
am
you're
now.
saying yeah, thank you for sharing. You're saying you tasted that kind of civic working towards the common good locally and growing up in Philly around the community garden and your involvement in your high school student council then?
Yeah, I wasn't on student government, but this was a group called the Philadelphia Student Union, which still exists today, and which was created after the city was considering privatizing the entire district and turning it over to a charter. Um, it was kind of early 2000s when the city was really in dire straits. And so there was a big fight around privatization of the school district. And the folks who were organizing that created the student union, and the whole idea was to empower chapter leaders at each of the different public schools to work together across the schools. And that introduced me to students who I would never have met because they went to neighborhood schools in different other parts of the city, and I was at a magnet school, which was much more better financed. And and um, and that exposed me to just how unequal the public school system was, just how ridiculous. We had a big library, other schools didn't have libraries. And that kind of exposure to the basic fundamental inequalities really in the American education system, plus the sort of organizing strategy that those folks were implementing of mixing together students across the city so that they kind of became aware of the larger system they were operating in. Plus the community garden is really just like my parents would have meetings about the garden in our living room. So political in the sense of not necessarily connected to a political party, but about making decisions about resources and decisions group, at the group
Elbow
level.
to elbow with fellow citizens. Yes, which is a big part of the vision for undetermined states. So, and you were in environmental policy, right? But I don't want to put words in your mouth. But remember when we had our coffee in Brooklyn, you were saying that, well, how I remember it, that you were feeling a bit disenchanted from seeing the lack of progress on the climate change sector in policymaking and realizing, well, maybe the whole system is kind of the whole problem. Am I
Yeah,
paraphrasing correctly?
yeah, pretty. It's close. I mean, I would say again a kind of family example. Um, my uncle, who I know voted for Trump, is uh, basically an environmental activist in my uh, mind, in the sense that he got written up in his local paper because he goes fishing almost every day, and every time he goes fishing, he's pulling out trash from the river in Indiana, out in Indianapolis, where he lives and where my mom grew up. And so I grew up with him. He has an incredible, probably more than any person I know, he has a direct point of contact with the natural world every single day,
A
and
direct line,
a direct
direct
line.
fishing
Yeah,
line.
yeah, exactly. And So what I mean by that is he's constantly cleaning up the river where he lives, and yet he voted for Trump. So then there's folks who live in the city and you know drive drive a big car around or whatever they're doing. They don't they might think of themselves as more environmentally friendly because they vote for like Democrats, let's say, or think about but are not necessarily you know taking responsibility for the environment. I just give that example as like for me, even just growing up and having those points of reference in my own family, and then thinking and seeing how we were politicizing climate change, and certainly the Republican Party like is there's a lot of blame, but there's blame on both sides in terms of the way that the climate issue got framed and was framed and as a separate issue, separate from conservation and our connection to the land. And I felt that we were not able to make progress on addressing emissions. And I was disillusioned from the possibility of the electoral system being able to solve that problem because of the way the binary it puts forward. And so when I found out about climate assemblies and citizens assemblies, um, I was intrigued and then inspired as this is a way to get folks in the room talking to each other, seeing past those divisions, and to even come up with the common sense goals that transcend the sort of the game of electoral politics and the language.
Yes, yes, which we're very well congealed in as a political body. So that's a good segue. The word democracy, people kind of, I feel like, instinctively feel like they know what it means and get it and like have a good feeling in their stomach when they hear it. I definitely do. But a word you just mentioned, a concept, electoral democracy, As I understand it, it's like, well, how do we do democracy? And would you mind maybe, and a kind of democracy you're working on advocating for is deliberative democracy. Would you mind spelling out what, I mean, we all kind of know what electoral democracy is, but it'd be good to hear from you working in the space. Like, what is electoral democracy? And then as a foil for what is deliberative democracy and how those are different?
Yeah, so going back to, and I put a book about this behind me, uh, going back to
What's the
ancient
book?
Greece, the book is called The Government of Chance,
Mm-hmm.
Sortition and Democracy from Athens to the Present by Yves Saint-Omer. And um, going back to ancient Greece, the word democracy referred to I mean, we know it as power of the people or control of the people, rule of the people, but it also referred specifically to the demes of Athens, which were made up of, which was an invention to empower citizens uh, to take control of policy making and rule making and judgment forming in Athens that wasn't through elections, it was through something called sortition or random selection through lottery. And so the democracy specifically referred to this practice of randomly selecting juries and councils that would create the rules, create the laws. And so we think of, I say electoral democracy because in the popular consciousness now we associate democracy with elections, but that's a really recent phenomena that has a deeper, more complicated history. Um, and so I would stress kind of the difference between a democracy that focuses on elections, leading to these different let's say, often binary, specifically in our two-party system, but um, versus a deliberative democracy that focuses on the institutions that inculcate or demand deliberation and problem solving. Um, yeah.
Yeah. We kind of, it's almost a synonym in the United States, like elections and democracy. And not that it's done in some nefarious way that, like, I don't know, maybe there's some campaign to associate those, but it kind of makes sense. Like, oh, well, we have the free will of the people to consent to being governed. And that's like, I think a lot of like philosophy stated that's what made that like, well, yeah, it brings up questions of like legitimacy with like random selection, but that is not where I want to get to right now, at least. But yeah, we associate democracy with elections, but then I find it's almost like a slippery slope to always truly like deliberation seen as more what the defining feature should be of a democracy. Is because it's like, well, we would hope that at least the people that we are electing as our representatives are then deliberating, talking amongst each other, making arguments, consulting experts, stakeholders on what the best route to go forward would be. And like I think that's just not, I don't feel like that's happening. Anyways, so deliberate, then yeah, just want to like summarize what deliberative democracy then means, because you mentioned sortition and by lot, and then how would you define like deliberative democracy broadly?
Right. So it's kind of, if we think about democracy generally as, in any type of democracy, one person, one vote, or a sort of equal ability to influence the system itself. Deliberative democracy says, well, hey, if you believe in that, whether you're using elections or you're using randomly selected groups or however you're choosing people, you're not going to get too far unless you have institutions that design for deliberation, right? And so
Yes.
that's kind of, it's double clicking on the fact that you need those institutions. So our Senate is supposed to be the most deliberative body, right? Does that happen? Is there real deliberation, or are people mostly making speeches to empty rooms for social media clips, right? I mean, so deliberative democracy can also be electoral democracy, it's just more focused on the values and principles of problem solving. And so that means we need to think about how do you design institutions that lead to more deliberation.
Yeah, and not to go too far in the weeds here, but how would you define deliberation? Like purely.
So it's not one, let's say what it's not, right? It's not just dialogue, it's not just free flow exchange of ideas. It's not debate where there's a clear what should we do and I'm taking one side and you're taking one side. It's a combination of those things and a third thing, which is we have a problem to solve. There are certain issues out in the world, and we're only going to get there if we agree to work through them together. And so deliberation at its core is thinking about how do we solve for certain problems, so it believes that it's not just a winner take all. It's not just a zero sum game. We can learn to live together, but we need to be able to agree to some basic terms, to work together, learn from each other. Right? There's an aspect of I don't have all the answers that you need to go into deliberation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's something that obviously I don't think we usually have with many of our fellow citizens, not only within our own political milieu, but also just definitely across the aisle. So we have that definition of deliberative democracy you shared. Thank you. And then, so you work specifically on citizens' assemblies. Do you want to first share what those are and then what your work is at the Democracy Innovation Hub around those?
Yeah, and we focus on the broader field of deliberative democracy as well, but citizens' assemblies have
Okay.
become particularly relevant recently, partly due to the issue of climate change. So there's been about between 700 to 1,000 citizens' assemblies or instances of randomly selected policy-making juries in the last couple of decades. And these have been on the rise partially due to the fact that democracies, electoral democracies, are struggling to solve a lot of the problems inherent or that we're facing in our societies. So, what is a citizens' assembly? A citizens' assembly takes a randomly selected group of people, representative or a cross section of the population, as much as possible. Um, Invites them in. We're talking between 30 and usually 150 people, but this it can get bigger. Invites them in to a shared deliberation around a specific issue or a set of issues. Asks them to learn from each other across their ideological geographic differences. Asks them to learn from experts from a bunch of different sides of the issue, and then has them formulate consensus-based policy recommendations. And this is like we're talking at least 3 weekends of meeting, right? So this is not a town hall that meets for one day or for a couple hours. This is really a group of diverse people meeting each other in person, multiple days, sharing meals, developing consensus recommendations. And then those recommendations go, depending on who's commissioning the assembly. If it's a government, if it's the city council, those recommendations go back to the city council. There's different versions of that, but that's the basic idea. Randomly selected group meeting for a long period of time, producing consensus policy recommendations.
And during these, and it's diverse in like political sway, religion, ethnicity, gender. It's like it's just supposed to be kind of a more or less random-ish sample of a political body, and then during those meetings, can you give us a kind of like, are they consulting experts or like what's going on during those meetings with
Yeah.
the selected group of
So
citizens?
first, there's a learning phase. It's good to imagine the space. It's usually a space, if you can think of a space with like 8 small tables so that folks can meet between 4 and 9 people at each table, and then a front area or stage where there can be a panel discussion, or a plenary conversation. And so the whole meeting ideally is taking place in one space, and they're moving between plenary and small table discussions, and cycling around talking about different aspects of the issue. The first stage is a learning phase where they're learning from a bunch of different experts. This begs the question, who decides on the experts? There's a lot of ways to do that, but there is let's say, a bureaucracy behind what a citizens assembly is. You've got to set up a learning input, right? Who decides? Well, ideally, a balanced group of folks who believe in the need to bridge divides, and who and believe in good faith in this process. Then you have a moderator at the front of the room who's helping guide the whole process, and you have small table facilitators. So there's a learning phase that happens, then there's a deliberation phase, and then there's the writing and the production of the recommendations phase, and that all depends. They're not one size fits all. This depends on the framing question, right? How do we increase access to affordable transportation in XYZ city, right? Or how do we, and these have been done in Ireland to change the constitution a few times. Paris has set up a permanent assembly. Bogota in Colombia has a version of a permanent assembly. So they're experiments. They all look slightly different depending on the context. And I think I would stress that that I focus on a broader field of deliberative democracy, because I don't think it's as if, these citizen assemblies are going to solve all our problems. These citizen assemblies are one kind of tool in the toolbox at a specific scale. But there's many more kind of soups we can create with these ingredients of randomly selected groups and deep deliberation, which is really the two principles at the core of a citizens assembly and the core of generally when we talk about deliberative democracy. These two aspects: random selection and deep deliberation. Long time,
Yeah.
not just coming together like an opinion poll.
Yeah, and it seems like you're kind of like incubating a cultural norm for how we do politics. That's kind of like a small dispersed like petri dish in various locales, but we're kind of like incubating like actually this is how politics not only is done but was done. And there's been empirical research just showing like what the pie chart of a senator's day looks like in a year, and it's like a 70% or something fundraising and spending time I don't know, hobnobbing with I don't know, the flying spaghetti monster or whoever they're talking to. It's just kind of the system seems like it's just completely ineffective before. That's part of what the Undetermined States of America project is. The premise is that like electoral democracy is just like obsolete to solve the complex socio-political moral problems of today's crises, manifold crises. And yeah, I'm really I think it's really cool that you just said like, so why don't you share like what you do specifically? Like what is your work involved as Phil with the Citizens Assemblies?
Yeah, sure. And I would just push back on one thing that you said before, which is
Please.
like it's also how it was done. I think the first part, in certain instances, in Italian city-states, in ancient Greece, in different parts of the world, in India, there's examples of using random selection. The first part, if we think about random selection and deep deliberation, the first part, yes, that's existed. Ancient Athens, they had that. There wasn't necessarily deep deliberation, or at least the institutions of ancient Greece weren't all designed for deep deliberation, right? Like, and that's why you have Plato and others very much critiquing democracy, because you get a good narcissistic manipulator there. So the
If only we could imagine what that looks like. Yes.
so
avoid that.
so today
Yeah.
these assemblies or councils look very different because they have small group facilitators, right? And this is actually a place where it gets a little controversial and interesting, because you think about, well, what is the bureaucratic apparatus needed for that? But not to just to point out that it's not as if these processes of deliberative democracy today, they're actually quite inventive, and I think that gets to the Undetermined States of America. We're not trying to go back. We're trying to think about this as a tool, and then hey, like oh my gosh, we have so many different technologies we can harness that can add to that as a one aspect.
Yeah, because and that's a good point you brought up with the pushback on like we had random selection or lot or sortition, but not necessarily deliberation. And this is like 2,000 years ago before like modern science or even like math existed, and like the kind of I don't know, like our epistemology, if you will, or like our knowledge buckets have just greatly increased in our theory of knowledge and how that works. And it's just expanded so much. So um, I don't know too much about this. I'm by no means claiming to be an expert, but there's this field I've heard of as like a just Wikipedia wormhole I went down called like social epistemology. And it's kind of like philosophy's recognition of like the kind of more so analytic philosophies, because this has been more on the continental side, like the different social structures that contribute to knowledge, but kind of like all of the different social structures that contribute to forming knowledge. And um also just research showing that like when you pull from, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've read is like when we think of like polling random citizens
Mm-hmm.
across the United States, like what do you think of the Israel-Palestine conflict? They could have just read a Facebook post
Right.
that triggered them, or they're gonna just spew something. It's like, okay, great. 60% of Americans are angry about this topic at 8 p.m. That's more that
Mm-hmm.
demonstrates social epistemology, if that's the right field, and adjacent modalities have shown, like from what I know, and I'm curious to know the insight on this, like when people are given the time, regular people, or just sampling to learn about the issues, consult experts, again with the question of like who counts, that's a good question, but just assuming that's some consensus agreement, people to trust, they usually come to pretty decent, moderate, accepted conclusions, even from people from wildly different backgrounds, as I understand it. Is that true in your experience or like your research?
Yeah, generally. I mean, I think it's dangerous to overgeneralize, right? We're not depending on
Yes,
what we're
which I
talking
love
about.
to do.
I think we're talking mostly about political judgment, right? Which is
Okay.
different than, hey, let's all come together and design the bridge together, right?
Right.
But the
Yes. Okay.
question
Good.
of should
Yes.
certain contours about the bridge decided to be decided by the community, or maybe certain safety features, or like there's an aspect that everyday people can come to just as good, if not better, decisions. And there's a book I'm forgetting that's about this expert political judgment, where it comes to that compares these two specifically. Where there was a guy
Yes.
at UPenn, I think, that did a study on this in particular. He did a study on political judgment, comparing experts who were trying to um, estimate or predict certain outcomes versus just like 12 random people. And the on the whole, the 12 random people were able to, like, taken together, on average, produced a as good or better estimate than the experts. Um, the other thing that what you just said points up, and this points to the other book I brought to our podcast, is this book, which is about deliberative polling.
Yes.
Yeah, democracy when the people are thinking.
Deliberative polling.
Right.
Yes. Jeremy, want to share a little about Jeremy Fishkin,
James Fishkin.
his
Yeah, yeah.
background? James Fishkin. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is good flow to talk about what the Hannah Arendt Center is doing. So, the
Yes.
BARD has been focused on sortition, and the Hannah Arendt Center has been thinking about sortition for the past 7 or so years. And one of the first people we invited to come speak was the writer of this book, Jim Fishkin, who's about to come out with a new book, by the way, in April. Um, and we'll hope to have him at an event in New York. Um, So the Deliberative Democracy Lab at Stanford, where Fishkin's based out of, has been doing this for decades. And by this I mean deliberative polling, which is, you mentioned kind of opinion polling. You call people up, what are they? Yeah, you get all kinds of biases, not just from what people think that day, but from how the question is framed, which is also true in citizens' assemblies, deliberative democracy. The question framing is crucial. It's a political question. But when you ask people for surveys over the phone, you get all kinds of bias, and people will answer the question even if they don't know anything about the topic, because they feel better answering the question than saying, I don't know, right? Because we also inculcate people with that. It's not okay to say you don't know in our culture in a way. So deliberative polling takes people, again, a randomly selected group, as representative as possible. There's a great example of this that was covered by the New York Times very well, called the America in One Room Project. They take anywhere from, again, a couple hundred to 1,000, 2,000. They did one on climate and energy online that you can see if you Google energy and climate deliberative poll Stanford. What they do, they've done this all around the world, so it's not like a specific culture that this works with. They've been proving this over the last several decades. Randomly selected group, large, more representative than these citizens' assemblies, which are often quite small.
And this is 1,000 people.
1,000 people, 2,000 people. It can be smaller too, 300, 400, but it's more representative the larger you get. Bring them to one place or gather them online. American One Room bought about 1,000, I think, Americans to Houston for a week. Had them deliberate in small groups over the top issues of the day. 2019, 2020. And importantly, ask them what they thought about these issues before the deliberations, before meeting other people that disagree with them, before learning from experts, and afterwards. And then measured the outcomes and the change. And importantly, they ask people what they think. Unlike a citizens' assembly, which is saying kind of empowered public judgment, where what do we as a group think? Let's raise our hands. Let's deliberate. Let's vote. I mean, the voting mechanisms are really interesting. But in deliberative polling, they ask people in private afterwards for their feedback on the same questions, right? And that's where they have shown, very good academic research at Deliberative Democracy Lab at Stanford, that first of all, deliberation increases people's, it basically enables people to change their mind in pretty profound ways. And in ways you wouldn't always expect. So recommend this book for that history.
Yes. Just show it to...
Revitalizing Our Politics Through Public Deliberation.
Democracy When the People Are Thinking.
Yes. And there's another example that I really like from that, if I can share it.
Please.
Okay. It's like hard to say no to that one, right?
Yeah.
So
I feel like I'm being polled.
Here's Fishkin, okay? He says on page 207, to continue with largely non-deliberative elections is to have a democracy of soundbite manipulation and mobilization. It is to put the fate of the nation entirely in the hands of a gigantic tug of war between competing teams without the thought and reflection that could also turn it into a competition of ideas. And so he references there another book he wrote called Deliberation Day. He wrote this back in 2004, and the call in his book Deliberation Day was like, this is insane what we're doing with elections. Like, people are basically just flipping a switch every 4 years depending on if the economy's good or bad. We should have a national holiday called Deliberation Day where everyone does this. Everyone deliberates over specific issues. And if you think about that vision compared to what we have of these debates, which aren't even good debates, like we have this insane mechanism that when you think about it, it's insane. I mean, all this money goes into paying for the space, the lighting, CNN, hosting, everybody tuning in. And the structure has nothing to do with addressing problems. It has everything to do with the sound bites or the little gotcha moments. It's kind of a moment of collective insanity, at least in my opinion.
Yes. Well, we're all entitled to our opinions. No, I totally agree, and absolutely agree. And hold on, if I could share a quick book.
Yes.
Similar Autocracy,
Yes.
Alex Guerrero's book, which I've been enjoying. I'm about halfway through, but to your point, Phil, he cites kind of 10 or 15 contemporary like challenges with our social like problems of today, like social problems, media problems, etc., that exacerbate the obsolescence of the electoral system, that make it far worse. And he cites Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, if you've heard of that. He says we've lost it. Like, people used to think, I think, like Socrates thought writing was a loss of like the oral tradition. It keeps getting dumber and dumber, I guess. Um, yeah, we're just infotainment. It's like, it's not actually like the media, the multi-billion-dollar media empire is wired for entertaining, not making sound social, moral, political judgments. And if I could bring it back to what you brought up about this really interesting locus here of like political judgment. I'm forgetting the phrase. I'm a bad philosophy undergrad major, but like I think it's like phronesis or something, like common wisdom. And Michael Sandel, from the philosopher from Harvard, talks about this a lot. Like, well, how does one cultivate practical, like civic judgment? Because if one reason I think of like our social landscape as like nodes of different juicy nuggets of epistemological know-how. Like
Mm,
academics are good at a certain empirical know-how. Mothers are good at mothering know-how. Plumbers, it's like everyone's got, and it's like, what strata of our society is this kind of civic know-how, this sound, this capacity to make sound moral judgment for the betterment of our fellow citizens. And the kind of current system we have is like, you have the Senate, which is like the aristoi, the aristocracy, the House, which is like the people, and we've kind of like had this mixed constitution of different political judgment. But this book, he does a very thorough list of all the reasons that those have been captured thoroughly that
mm.
by the political establishment, the economic one, the media. I'm going on a rant now. My apologies to Phil and the listeners, but this idea you're bringing up of like, of course, people aren't going to have nuanced or even basic elementary level understandings of the issues if they're just polled randomly or not given the space. And I think physicality is really important. And like, I like, yeah, to like helping people actually think, just not even deeply, but just not in an entertainment way, because the
Right.
whole flavor shifts, right?
Yes, from a passive to an active role, and that's central to it, I think. And you have to inculcate that. We have to have schools that are formed by. Right? I mean, we learn how to do this because we learn in high school usually what elections are, right? And elections are essentially popularity contests between maybe kind of like a few people who are super talented and then like a couple of assholes. uh, and it's a resume builder. It has nothing to do with the civics. What's ridiculous is when you think about how detached this any civic or government classes are in school from student government, and that's where I really think we have a big potential. I mean, I'm at Bard. Bard has 10 public high schools that it runs in its network. 4 of them are in New York City, um, and I think we have a moment right now. I mean, what if you're coming out of high school right now? Like, what is democracy to you? It's such an ugly field out there, and like, why would you go into politics? Like, the personalities that are attracted both usually to student government and then to larger government due to this media ecosystem that you're talking about referencing. It's reality TV. It's it's not reality TV that we want to watch or we want our kids to be watching. And so I think I like Neil Postman's analysis. So
Yeah, just like entertainment will be our trap, not Big Brother tyranny. Or it's similar to the Brave New World argument. Like, we'll actually be trapped through just pleasure and just. I mean, yeah. I mean, I do think that core to democracy is this kind of like, and people are always quick to remind us when we talk about America as a democracy, like, well, it's actually a republic. It's actually intentionally designed to avoid certain aspects of democracy. And one thing I find hopeful about the deliberative democracy movement is that, or it is that I do think most Americans have a faith in, like, and it's in our Declaration of Independence, rule by and for the people, and the Constitution. And I do want to maybe transition to more of the undetermined stuff with political, like, constitutional reform, and hearing your takes on that, maybe how it might connect to your work, if you'd like to go there. I also want to. I feel like is there more you'd like to? I just think it's so interesting the work you're doing. Well, what are you like? Go back. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place. What is the actual your current initiatives that you're working on
Yeah,
at the Hannah
Final
Arendt
Center.
Center? Yes.
So there's three aspects or pillars or buckets of our work. One is with public servants. So generally, we are trying to catalyze high quality, politically impactful um, experiments and processes of deliberative democracy, both in government and in the classroom. And so we run workshops with public servants, folks who work in government, elected officials who think this should be part of how they engage with their constituents. Um, we work very closely with the New York City Civic Engagement Commission. Um, so we've been doing those workshops for the past 3 years. Um, Second bucket is with teachers and educators to bring this narrative, these books that we're talking about, right, into the classroom in interesting curricular ways, and thinking about how does it connect to student government? Can you randomly select student councils, X, Y, Z? And then third, we try to collaborate with the broader ecosystem of organizations that are working in the field of deliberative democracy, serve as a learning platform for them, and especially try to incentivize them to collaborate and find ways in which we can co-fundraise, find ways in which we can, working with folks like Stanford, where we can actually scale up some of these initiatives and learn from each other. Um, we're in New York. The Hannah Arendt Center is north of New York City. Hannah Arendt herself is buried there. Hannah Arendt wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism. Her spirit is very much aligned with these citizen councils, citizens assemblies, and so Bard's a liberal arts college. It's up in Annandale on Hudson. It's an hour and a half north of the city, but there's 4 public high schools in New York. So a lot of my work, I live in Brooklyn. A lot of my work is focused in collaborating with organizations, both again in those 3 buckets: the public servants and elected officials, teachers and educators, and then the broader civic ecosystem, trying to figure out how does this fit in, how can we scale this, at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. And then I think how it connects to the undetermined states is we we really think that, we talked about the media ecosystem. It's really hard to break through that. And in order to break through that, we need big examples. New York City's a major city, um, important state, and we don't have examples of this at the, Stanford's been doing this for a really long time, but how do we do examples of deliberative democracy that break through the shitstorm and
Yes.
inspire people, especially young people? So we'd like to
Yes.
we'd like to catalyze and help organize those processes, whether they be deliberative assemblies or whether it be deliberation about the future of the Constitution. We're excited to partner with the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia to run a citizens jury next year. That's going to be exciting, on constitutional issues. So depending on certain political crises or opportunities or local elected officials who are excited about this stuff, we partner with different groups to try to run deliberative processes.
Awesome. So it's like running deliberative experiments, connecting with, like, local educational institutions, practicing it there, and trying to put it on the map of like American political consciousness.
Exactly.
That is very inspiring to me, and really important work that I'm glad Bard has you working on, because that's
Me too.
yes.
Very lucky.
So to kind of talk about it on like a kind of meta level then. So something's wrong with our current democracy. And I say that not like for our listeners, and we're a growing platform and movement, but I know that we have people who on my podcast or who subscribe to Undetermined States of America. Founding citizens were called. You're a founding citizen as well, Phil. Congrats, whether you want to be one or not. There's people I know on the all across political spectrum. And when I say our democracy is broken, I want to qualify that not as like, well, because Trump's not like, what I mean more so is there is this deep sense felt by America. I think actually Trump is a example of the sense that our system is not working. So that's kind of like premise one, like our system isn't working. It could probably be better. And the phrase we say at Undetermined States of America, or on the Substack at least, is we're running Windows 7087. We know it, and we need a new system. We think we probably need a new system. So we know the system's old. Then it's a question of, okay, well, what might the next system look like? So we know the system's broken, and what might the next system look like? And it sounds like the work you're doing via the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard with these citizen assemblies is saying, whatever the next system might be like, we think deliberative democracy needs to be a very substantial, if not the main thing to that. Like it's almost, in a sense, the strongest lever to pull in terms of like systemic change. Am I going too far with that perhaps? That like, because there's just so many how I'm seeing there's just so many like polycrises, like the economy, inequality, healthcare, war, climate change, the list goes on. It's like we can try to move policy forward in this broken old computer, or we actually need a new operating system. And then deliberative democracy seems to be to me, I mean, I haven't done a literature review or an exhaustive overview, but like the most promising way to go about that. And again, as you shared earlier, we talked about citizens assemblies could be one way to go about that. Maybe somehow elections become, but like elections are so dominated by entrenched interests in a entertainment profit media landscape. Anyways, so I'm just trying to get us back so we can like, are there any other, would you say there's like a growing deliberative democracy movement then?
Yeah,
underway?
I mean, it's not massive, but it's definitely growing, and it's growing in multiple parts of the world. As is rising authoritarianism and the belief that actually no, like we the people need to delegate and have one strong person steer the ship. And I think for me
that's the authoritarian view, or the
yes, yeah, that's the authoritarian view. Yeah. And so yeah, I would say. I mean, you stated that maybe deliberative democracy is the strongest lever to pull. I think if I had a magic wand, I don't know if I would pull that lever first or getting money out of campaigns first. I do think that what these processes shed light on is that we can work together and solve our problems when we get money out of the way, when we get entrenched interest out of the way, and our system is very much well, we've basically legalized corruption, and these are systems of anti-corruption.
Yeah, and I like Lawrence Less's book Republic Loss differentiates between quid pro. Lawrence Less is a law professor at Harvard who has written a lot about what corruption means in our government, and he wrote this book Republic Lost, where he says we think of corruption like quid pro quo, like here's a golden stack of gold bars and a Mercedes and enjoy your drive around New Jersey. Oh wait, that's one form of corruption, like the kind of but then corruption, like the system, like just rewards complacency and stuffing one's pockets and not actually and just like not moving anything forward. Like when an old computer is corrupted, it just doesn't function anymore. Like it's rotted. Um. Anyways, I where were you going with that? I just sorry,
Well,
I went on a
I
little
do
Lawrence
think
Lessig
that
kick.
that's where the I mean, I think what your project is also about in terms of some aspects of the system are broken partly because of the way we inculcate a our political culture around elections. Another
Yes.
part of it's broken because the system behind elections is so dominated by money because of Supreme Court at this point and has been made legal by Supreme Court decision. So I'm convinced, um, yeah, that uh, the if we don't reform our our campaign finance system, that because I think essentially like a lot of people are making money out of the broken system, right?
Oh yeah, it's
That's the
profitable.
point. It's yeah,
Much like healthcare, I think
right,
one of the best analogy could be healthcare. Where it's profitable to be inefficient, and
right.
Americans can feel that and die from that daily. And well, I think it's interesting because like maybe we have like the lever being deliberative democracy or the lever being, I mean, obviously they could be intermixed, like the
Mhm.
money out of politics. That's one reason. I mean, I think well, here's my ultimate lever is a second constitutional convention that redrafts the Constitution to be deliberative or laudocratic or sortition based, and then using this culture we've inculcated through projects like Undetermined States of America, Democracy Innovation Hub, Hannah Arendt Center, these different orgs, we've already practiced as American citizens deliberation on the big issues, the economy, healthcare, education. And then we do, I think, yeah, like deliberative democracy is almost like an outcome we want to see, but that the system also kind of needs to be rebooted. Like
Mhm.
getting money out of politics is like saying let's take water out of the ocean or draining the swamp and it's just wetlands. Anyways, so I don't know if we disagree or not, but I hear the money out of politics. But I'm taking a lot from Alex Guerrero,
Mm.
the Autocracy author, who says it's just we need just a new system altogether. I haven't finished the book yet. I don't think he know if he advocates for a second constitutional convention. I know some other activists in our realms are. Um, but I do see it as like a lost cause personally. I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we'd get out money out of politics if you have
Mm.
what like do you have any ideas of how to go about that?
I think
The
there's
simple problem.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's the constitutional level, certainly, like an amendment. I think we should be dreaming big, and I think young people want to be dreaming big. So I think like
Yes.
I think that's why I'm compelled by your project too, is that if we're encouraging people to think about the Constitution, well, first of all, it's like it's just like healthy food. Like it's good if you're sick, it's good if you're not sick. Like we should deep every American should have at least a familiarity with the founding documents in a way that's not like this is something that happened in the past. No, it's like they thought that this was going to be amended and rewritten every generation. And that's a total failure. And that should be something that's expected in schools across the country, that there's a sort of creativity connected to the history of the country and our documents. So that's why I love your metaphor about the old operating system and the new operating system. But at the local level, there's a lot of great reforms, and at the state level, for instance, I mean, New York City has a matching funds program where if you get enough signatures, right, if you demonstrate that it's not just big moneyed interest, but a lot of individual people that support you, you can get 8-to-1 matching grants, right? And the city will provide those funds. Um, so that's a good, there's democracy dollars, there's campaign vouchers to innovate there. But
Yes.
yeah, are those small scale compared to a constitutional convention? And is it, but I think, replacing elections with lottery system is an even bigger task in some ways. Um,
Right.
so
So we had a quick little bathroom water break. We were talking about campaign finance reform, and Phil brought up the point, which I had not considered, that rewriting the whole Constitution to be autocratic might be also challenging, which I'm starting to be aware of. So this has been helpful. We're all learning here. Uh, no, you're totally right, and this brings up a theory of, I don't know if I use this word right, but I've heard it before and I just like how it sounds. It's usually how I go about saying words. A theory of change, of like social change or like political change. Like that's not what that means actually. We need people who like work within. You actually spelled this out very like succinctly for me over at the cafe we went to, the board game cafe. Like people who are working within the system, people who are kind of doing the big, crazy, kind of impossible things that are a little more like seem unlikely, but like we need that to like have the fresh air coming in, and then yeah, and like intermixing of both. And I definitely think campaign finance reform is a very worthy and necessary endeavor, whether through nonprofits, advocacy, etc. I personally, as Colin, am feeling called to try to, the big like vision, like how do we envision what the future of our, that's the whole. So if you don't mind, we can humor me and go to the undetermined part now. The whole point of Undetermined States of America kind of starts from the premise like we no longer feel united. And one reason I'm positive we don't feel united, I think, is that we don't actually believe in the system of government. It doesn't. We don't think it actually like represents, like it's capable of actually governing or representing the people. And so the slogan of the project is to be determined by and for the people, so we can actually be united around a common vision, acknowledging there's going to be disagreements and different conceptions of the common good. But that's what makes this country so like alive and unique. It's
mm,
like it's one of the few countries founded like on an ideal. Anyways, that I do think we need, and I'm guessing you would agree, but these kind of popular movements to help try to go for the seemingly impossible task of rewriting the Constitution. And something I like to remind people of when I talk about like writing a new, so just the Constitution, and you're from Philly, so it was written in Philly from like May 1787 to September, like 4 months, by some really smart, mostly dudes, who synthesized the best thinking of the day of what they thought the system, like a system of government that represented the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and kept society stable, again, with their old, outdated ways of understanding what equality looked like. And I think it's our task as Americans, especially as we're kind of confused and split, like our identity is in being pioneers and visionaries of democracy. That we are actually, that's what we do as like a people within the global sphere, is we're meant to take risks with democracy. And what inspires me about like what you're working on, the citizens assemblies and deliberative democracy, is that it's kind of like, it feels like, I don't know what the founding fathers felt like when like we got to get free of this tyranny, let's like do elections. I don't know what the light bulb moment felt like, but golly, do I do I feel that when I hear about what you're working on and about deliberative democracy and citizen assemblies and sortition and autocracy, like it just feels kind of intuitive, right? It's like this feels like it kind of gets to the core root of the failures of the other operating system, which had a great run, fantastic, but it's taken on this religious creed to a new operating system that we can reprogram and re-envision what its parts are. I did want to say that in the beginning, like, well, here's what Undetermined States of America is now, so I am partially catching up that I forgot to mention that in the beginning. But yeah, that is what I'm hoping ideas like Latocracy, like Liberal Democracy, like Citizen Assemblies can inspire Americans to think big about what we want our government to look like. Anyways, what, on a practical question for you, Phil, sorry, my little just soliloquy here of like, what do you think of a second constitutional convention? Like, what does that bring up for you in terms of feasibility, personal interests?
So a convention, so the way a convention would be called, at least under our current rules, is through Article 5 of the Constitution. And there's both hopes by some people in that possibility, and there's a lot of fears, because similar in the first Constitution, the folks who went in there didn't have a lot of guardrails in terms of what they could come out with. And a lot of people saw that convention as a coup, as a totally, getting rid of the Articles of Confederation and establishing a totally new order.
Was it technically illegal, do you know? So do you want to just maybe share a little blip of the history for our listeners who might not be as familiar with constitutional history? It's like a little snippet.
Well, and I'm not the person to do this, to be honest, but I'm more of an enthusiast than a historian here. But if I understand, first of all, there wasn't a Supreme Court, right? So
we know we're on a podcast.
But so the 1787 convention went in with a certain mandate to try to fix certain parts of the Articles of the Confederation. And while they were there, decided to rewrite the whole thing, right? And from that point on, there's an interesting... the best resource for this, by the way, is the Constitution Center. It's a website. Philadelphia Constitution Center has excellent programming and history of this. But the early stages of the U.S. were really battles over those different constitutional visions. So we think of there being this founding and consensus document, the Founding Fathers, and it's like it was a fight, and there were all these different visions of what should be included. And many of they created the amendment system so that it could be changed and renovated, right? But and there's been waves of amendments, right? Post Civil War, the most probably the most important constitutional amendments, getting rid of slavery, then getting rid of discrimination. So there's been waves of amendments to the Constitution, but to call for a convention and actually have a convention has not happened. And so that would be a big thing.
Could I pause you there?
How do I? Yeah, go ahead.
I have heard, and I'm pretty sure it's from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. I've heard we actually do have an example of a second constitutional convention, and it was the 1787 convention. It was called to rewrite the Articles of Confederation, I think. And listeners come for the most up-to-date historical. But I've read that somewhere that there actually is a precedent for calling a constitutional convention, and that's how the original constitution that we use now is actually...
Yes. And that was my point about the Supreme Court. That like a lot of the institutions, the things that exist now post the creation of the convention, were not there because we got a new constitution, right? So there were where was I going with that? Oh, so we haven't done it since 1787. And so because of that, there's not a lot of experience, and there's not a lot of structure in the Article 5 delineating how it would work. That's the interesting, hopeful and scary thing, right? So there are specific movements to call for an Article 5 convention. And if one was called, the probably the risky thing is that a lot of how it would work would depend on which party's in power and at the state level. So,
Yes.
how delegates are chosen. So from that internal mechanism, it would be always risky and prone to lots of power politics. But calling in general for a rewriting of the foundational rules, whether through amendments or through a reimagining of the Constitution, it's like I think that's a good civic exercise. Do I think we should have a constitutional convention right now? No, unless there's a plan. I think, and I think I would
Well,
say,
that's all our time for our guest, Phil. Thank you for joining us on the
well, wait,
Undetermined States of America.
Colin, don't kick me off. Don't kick me off, bro. Um, the unless there's a plan, and I think that's what we are called to do. I think we should be figuring out how to amend our constitution, what changes need to be made. And I think there's a lot of groups, including yours, who are starting to think about that. So I don't think we should have a convention today,
Yes,
but
neither.
I think we should plan for rewriting or amending our constitution.
Yes. Cool. Yeah, you can stay on. So yeah, because to use the kind of old operating system analogy or anything broken, if something's broken, totally obsolete or not, like I don't know, like mostly not working, and it's just better to if you had a car from 1787. I mean, political truths and moral truths are timeless, but um you wouldn't you'd want to you want to design a whole like envision what the next one would look like. You would need a canvas. That is another meaning of the word undetermined is like it's not only that we don't feel united, but also that we actually need to determine, like deliberate on
Mm-hmm.
what that next vision looks like. And it's meant to be a canvas where we can envision like what we would put in through a constitutional amendment or a constitutional convention. So we're not just like showing up blank, but the idea that, oh, a autocratic Congress instead, or like a mutualist owned interweaving community network for jobs and housing, or whatever it might be. Um, well, Article 5 also, there's two ways to trigger a constitutional convention. Do you want to share what those are with our listeners, if you don't mind? If you
Yes.
don't,
So
are you? Yeah, you're
so
familiar.
you can um, I believe it's 3/4 of the states need to come together to call for um, a convention, or you can have 2/3 of Congress.
Yes. I'm realizing we have 3 seconds until your stated hard stop. And when
There's a
we were on the bathroom break, folks, he was like, "I really need to go." Just kidding. Yeah. Does that? Should we?
We've
You
got a
gotta
couple
wrap
more
up.
minutes. Couple more
Okay.
minutes. There's a couple things I want to make sure to point
Please,
out. Point
please.
to.
I'm just I'm just waxing poetic here. So I please encourage you to stop me. What please as our guests?
So first of all, I forgot to mention this. We have a sort of a learning journey that people can go on at our website called sortition.academy, which is a series of short videos that talk about
Cool.
deliberative democracy, citizens' assemblies, and sortition.academy. And so if people want to learn the basics of how sortition works, citizens' assemblies, deliberative democracy, they can go there. We're going to be
I'll link
updating
to
it.
that on
Yeah.
our yes. And that's
There's an
through the Hannah Arendt Center.
correct, the Hannah Arendt
Cool.
Center at Bard College.
Sortition.academy. Awesome.
Sortition.academy. Um, we also have an upcoming teacher training it's likely going to happen in August for teachers that want to come, and they could go to our website, the Hannah Arendt Center, and look at the Democracy Innovation Hub. That program is called Doing Democracy Differently. And there's an awesome teacher who we've worked with in the past that we're going to work with again, And that was the one point I wanted to make was, in order to think big, think about rewriting the Constitution, think about amending the Constitution, we should be giving we should be modeling the structures of how a healthy version of doing that would look. Like what is the
Yes.
not only the new operating system, but what's the process design,
Yes.
for being able to do deliberation well.
Yes. And I take inspiration from your work. I see you like taking the like already been working on this for 3 years and taking the lead on it in that it's like I'm hoping Undetermined States of America and eventually have really lively in-person experiences of deliberation for some big idea. Like, yeah, like inculcating the culture. Constitutional convention thing, an inspiring dream, but a theory of change that I like from the sociologist Eric Olin Wright, like interstitial revolution. You build the new in the shell of the old. Like you build egalitarian or alternative cultures in the current system and help facilitate those cultures like developing and spreading, and eventually there's like a cultural shift once it hits like a threshold. And that's what I see that's how I think of like your very important work is contributing a lot to, is like we just don't have people are lonely, we're isolated, we don't have third places anymore. And to me it's like, what better bang for the buck where we both can solve for people's like isolation and loneliness and also our civic participation. Like I think the American people are very extroverted. It's like an extroverted culture, and it's just like it just feels like, yeah, this is kind of our chapter now where like we have to declare independence again. Like every July 4th should be like a reinstantiation of like, what are we trying to be independent from? We had freedom from like the king, now like private tyranny. Anyways, sorry, I'm going off a bit. So I really, it's like that's how I think of what you're doing. It's like really important work. Like it's nothing's really going to change or advance towards lived democracy if people just don't know how to practice it. So
Absolutely.
sortition.academy. Do you teach any courses on there or like video?
We ran that as a flipped course, so it's a series of short videos, and at Bard we ran it as a flipped course where students would watch those videos, and then we would just do discussion in class about the sort of lectures. They're basically a series of short lectures.
Cool.
Yeah. And we want to do more popular education in New York City. We should absolutely partner to do
I'd love
a
to.
deliberative event in the city.
Yes. I'll ask you offline if some venue ideas for that, because I'm not um well, I would like to give you, because I have talked quite a bit. I really appreciate you chatting with me, and I definitely would like to talk to you again on this podcast. But any closing thoughts or ideas, or you'd like to share with our listeners, or how they can get involved in your work, both and?
Yeah, the Hannah Arendt Center has a newsletter, goes out weekly. Sign up for that. Go to our website, hack.bard.edu. Sortition.academy is the other website. And I live in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. We're doing an event we're doing a series of events in the city over this coming year. So check out our website and stay tuned. And looking forward to seeing you again in person, Colin.
Yes, always a pleasure talking. Yes, thank you for joining us, Phil, and we'll be back next time on the next Undetermined States of America podcast. Thank you, guys. Goodbye.